Welcome to the Intentional Leaders Podcast, the podcast where we share tips, stories, tools, and practices to help you lead with purpose and intention. In this episode, I sit down with Philip Mead. Philip is a 31-year NASA veteran who led the cultural transformation efforts following the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster. And whether you lead a team of 5 or 5,000, this conversation gives us powerful lessons about how to shape organizational culture. 3 key reasons you will not want to miss this episode is because he really uncovered, with a lot of assistance, of course, and discovered why even the best organizations can make catastrophic decisions in a level of culture where there was high employee engagement. And NASA was ranked as one of the best places to work while simultaneously experiencing one of its greatest tragedies. You're going to also learn how cognitive biases silently shape our leadership decisions, from identity threats to psychological safety, the ways that we unintentionally discourage dissent. And then 3, walk away with some actionable strategies to build culture that supports your strategy. So if you have ever wondered why good people sometimes make poor decisions, or how to create a culture where people challenge assumptions and they speak up and make better decisions together, then this episode is for you. All right, I would like to officially welcome Philip Mead to our podcast today. Thanks for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us, Philip. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So we got a chance to meet earlier, and I just mentioned to you before we recorded that I was ridiculously excited to talk to you again. I think you've got an amazing background, and you're bringing all of that knowledge, insight, wisdom into your business today. But you spent 31 years at NASA, and when we first talked, you said you had 6 careers within NASA. So tell the audience a little bit about that before we dig into the questions for today.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. NASA was a great organization, and they gave me lots of opportunities to move around within and do a variety of different things. And a piece of that was I was able to kind of redefine myself instead of just narrowly thinking of myself as a particular type of engineer, and think of myself more as a problem solver. And I started out early on as being a payloads engineer, really testing and integrating the different types of experiments and satellites and payloads and things that went into the shuttle bay to make sure that they worked before they got up on orbit. And then we moved into more working on the International Space Station. So I helped with assembly and test of that before it went up into orbit. And after we got it up in orbit, I became more of a process improvement manager to make sure that we were processing the elements for, that were going up repeatedly as efficiently as possible. And then one of the big turning points in my life was after the Space Shuttle Columbia accident. I was asked to lead the culture change that was required for return to flight, because the Accident Investigation Board found that the culture at NASA had as much to do with the accident as the piece of foam that hit the wing. And so that was a major turning point in my career, where I got out of the more technical work and began doing more organizational and system type of work. And after I did that and got NASA to the point to where we were able to return to flight, the center director actually asked me to go and work in HR and create an organization development unit. So that we could continue to focus on the culture that we had now created. And that took a lot of trust for me, and but it worked out. And so I went and I spent a couple of years creating that and figuring out how do we run organizational development across the center. And then the next big challenge that we were facing, honestly, was the retirement of the space shuttle. And there was a massive workforce challenge because we weren't going to need nearly the workforce that we had. And so I wanted to go over and try and help solve that problem. So I went over and I led the strategic workforce planning for the center to try and solve the workforce issue that we were facing. And when we got through that, the next big challenge
you needed
was...
a nap. Then you needed a nap.
I needed a nap. I took a nap. So I did a pit stop because I had to prove that I was still an engineer because I'd been in HR for a little
Okay.
while. So I helped to design the launch control system for the current Artemis missions. So I worked on
Oh,
that for a little while.
yeah.
And then I spent the last 10 years of my career helping to transform Kennedy Space Center into a multi-user spaceport, really
Mm,
leading what was required to allow us to do operations as a multi-user spaceport,
yeah,
because there's a lot that goes into operating as a combined government commercial entity
oh, sure.
with lots of large exploding rockets moving all
Right.
over the place.
All right. So I think the irony is not lost on me of an engineer going into HR and like that whole piece is a fascinating little twist to your career that probably not a lot of engineers experience, but for good reason, right? Though to think about
Yep.
the organizational development that was required and what you had discovered. What a fascinating career! And now you start your own business. You're working with organizations and leaders to help them work with their challenges, right? And
Yes.
I think what's so cool is, when most people hear NASA, and I think with Artemis mission too, I mean, so many people got so invested in that and so excited about it, and it um, it just sparked, I think, enthusiasm and understanding of NASA in a way that hasn't, been, I guess, as accessible to people in our lifetime. But when people hear NASA, they think brilliant people, high standards, incredible discipline. So when you were asked to lead that cultural, transformation after Columbia, what surprised you the most when you started exploring that and what you perceived to have gone wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. I mean, people aren't wrong when they think that it's a bunch of brilliant people out there that are really dedicated and love working out there.
Sure.
And the thing that really surprised me and honestly scared me the most about being asked to lead the culture change was I thought that the culture was awesome. I loved
Yeah.
working at Kennedy Space Center. I loved NASA. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
Disneyland for engineers. You
Yes.
know, most of the people that I knew out there, myself included, it was a childhood dream. I mean, my
Sure.
mom loves telling the story about how she took me to Kennedy Space Center when I was a child, and I told the guard on the way
Oh,
in, "I'm going to work at Kennedy Space Center someday.
oh,
I'm going to work for NASA." You know,
yeah.
she
You're like,
loves
sure,
telling that
kid.
story, and I'm not an anomaly. I'm not one of the only ones. Like the place was filled with people like that, and
Sure.
so it wasn't what a lot of people think of when you think, oh, there was a bad culture. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
overbearing or people weren't afraid to speak up. And to confirm this, right after the accident, a report was released that named NASA as the best place to work in the federal government and
Wow.
said that NASA's employees were the most engaged and most committed in the entire federal government. And
Wow.
so what this led me to discover was that organizational culture goes a lot deeper and is a lot more complex than what a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah.
Because absolutely loving where you work and being engaged is a piece of organizational culture and what it
Sure.
produces. But it goes beyond that because the behaviors that it produces need to also be a part of what the organization exists for, a part of what drives your mission if you're a government organization, or your strategy if you're, you know, a private organization.
You bet.
And so that's really where we had lost the focus and we weren't really paying attention to how are maybe some of these behaviors that we're accidentally creating with our culture working counter to what we really want for a mission driven organization where safety is at the core and we have to launch
Yeah.
astronauts and return them safely to Earth.
Sure.
Because things can combine in ways with organizational culture that, on the face of it, it seems like they are very good things, but when they combine together in certain ways, in certain environments, it actually produces behaviors that are counter to what you want.
Mm.
And so, you know, being the nerd that I am, this is because an organization's actually a complex adaptive system,
Yeah.
and it has this property called emergence. And so emergence happens when you have properties of a system that interact and produce something that can't be determined by just looking at the pieces themselves. And
Sure.
so to give you an analogy to make it easier to understand, if I were to tell you the taste of sugar is an emergent property, right? You can't touch the taste of sugar. You can't move the taste of
Yeah.
sugar. It's not something that you can operate directly on. It's created by the combination of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
And if I were to give you carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen separately and said, here, lick these things,
Yeah.
you couldn't tell me what sugar tastes like.
Right. Right.
And the crazy thing is, I can take carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and I can combine them differently and it'll taste like vinegar.
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
It's the relationships between them, how they're combined, that determines what emerges.
Yeah.
And so you see it sometimes in organizations where an employee, for example, will get labeled as being a bad employee. I like to use the finger quotes because I don't like the terms
Yeah.
good and bad a lot of times
Yeah.
when it comes to organizational things. I don't think good culture, I hate that term because it's really more about being effective for what
Yeah.
you need. It's good or bad doesn't play out and very well when you're trying to talk about these things.
Sure.
But they'll get labeled as a bad employee. But if you have a good leader, sometimes that leader will be able to take that employee and move them to a different area or a different group, and suddenly they'll become a star employee.
Yeah. Yes.
It's the same employee. What changed? Well, you shifted the environment. You shifted who they were working with or how they were working. Like you
Yeah.
just changed the ingredients.
Yeah.
And we see this happen in a lot of different times in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah.
so this is some of what was happening with NASA. Some of what was making us great was actually combining with some of the other things that were going on and some of what makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
And it was producing behaviors that were counter to what we really needed.
Oh, interesting. So, what's an example of that? What are some things that you discovered that were emerging
Yeah.
from the experience? Yeah.
So even if you're an engineer, believe it or not, you're still a human. And that's one of the surprising discoveries that came out of all of this, is that engineers are actually humans. And
I
because of
love that.
that, we, engineers actually behave in similar ways to everyone else. And so at our core, at the core of every human being, there's a desire to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And we have this brain that is divided into a conscious portion and a subconscious portion. And that
Sure.
subconscious portion, that autonomic nervous system, its entire purpose is to keep us alive. If you
Yeah.
think about all the different things that your autonomic nervous system does, it's controlling your heartbeat, it's controlling your breathing, it's controlling, the diameter of your blood vessels to make sure that blood's getting
Yeah.
everywhere it needs to go. All of these things are trying to keep you alive. It's also doing other things to keep you alive, behaviors that you're not even aware of, that it thinks are going to help you to survive.
Sure.
And some of these behaviors are protectionist behaviors, like how you show up or what you choose to share or what you don't share with others, because it's going to make you either a part of the tribe or not a part of the
Yes.
tribe, because
Yes.
being included in the tribe either gives you safety, or being excluded from the tribe is going to cause you to die.
Yeah.
It drives you to do behaviors that make you feel competent, because being competent means that you're going to survive. Being incompetent means that you're going to die. It's
Yeah.
doing things to manage these feelings all the time, because it's really about survival. And so it wants you to feel like you know who you are, you have an identity that you align with, and that you are safe. And when those things become violated, and violated in ways that we're not aware of and we're insecure about, our subconscious takes over and it begins driving us to do behaviors to manage those feelings without letting our conscious mind know.
Yeah.
When that happens, we begin actually acting most often, if not always, in ways that are counterproductive to what we really want or need, um, in the big picture, because we're
Yeah.
focused on that very narrow scope of I need to solve this internal issue.
Yeah.
And so, as an example, you take these highly engaged employees that love their job and their identity is NASA and they're,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost a shuttle engineer, and they work in a place where data is the foremost thing, and we have signs hanging up that says in God we trust, all others bring data.
Mm.
Like,
Oh,
all of that sounds like good stuff, right?
yeah.
That's what you
Yes, of
want from an
course.
engineer.
Yes.
And but you put them in an environment where there's constant threats of program cancellation, so people are
Oh,
constantly threatening to kill their baby, and
yes.
there's constant threats, schedule pressure and budget pressure. You've got a
Yeah.
countdown clock as a screensaver to core complete for ISS,
Oh, wow.
and you know you have an accident where there's video that's inconclusive,
Mm-hmm.
so you're operating off of 20 years of intuition that tells you there's a problem, but you don't have data to prove it. And now
Yeah.
you're supposed to stand up in front of a mission management team and publicly declare that you believe that there is a hole in the shuttle, but you can't prove it. And if
Oh,
you're wrong, your subconscious fear is that you could become the boy who cried wolf
yes, of
and
course.
carry that mark with you for the rest of your career that you care so much about. And your
Yes,
credibility, which is kind of your calling card within the agency,
of
is
course.
now damaged for the rest of your career. And so this level of psychological safety is really what was missing. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't because anybody was going to yell at them, and it wasn't
Yeah.
because there was going to be a chair thrown, and it wasn't an overt in your face thing. And it
Yes.
was largely a function of a lot of really, really positive attributes about the workplace.
Sure.
It was just how it was combining and how we hadn't thought through, okay, what
Wow.
are all the things going on, and if we think about the specific scenarios that could happen, are people going to stand up and behave in the ways that we want to in the most extreme circumstances?
Sure.
And we hadn't thought through that, and the answer unfortunately was no.
Yeah. Wow. That was an incredibly well um, described um, situation about how our unconscious, and automatic nervous, all the things affect us in a way that we don't realize. It isn't a part of our intentional actions, behaviors, all those good things. And I think incredibly smart people don't realize all of the effects of those things going on. And as you said, it is about survival and survival of, our identity, our credibility, all the things. I think it was very well articulated. And you said to me previously too that the culture, lives in the hearts and minds of people. And so what were a couple of those hidden beliefs or identity threats? I mean, you kind of talked about it in the bigger picture, credibility, but how do you think that affected the disaster? What did you discover was really going on there?
I do believe that the identity of being a shuttle engineer and that being so critical and that being threatened was a piece of it. I think that it being threatened both from what happens if I stand up and I'm wrong,
Yeah.
what is that going to mean about me and my future here? I think that was a piece of it. I think the identity of being a shuttle engineer and the threat that the program could get canceled, I think that
Yes.
created a cognitive bias because
Yes.
now you're weighing decisions of risk against program cancellation, which
Yeah.
overly weights the decision on the
Of
one
course.
side and makes it harder. I think that, the whole overemphasis on data,
Yeah.
the in God we trust, all others bring data. I think that was a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I think that even some of the Gene Krantz failure is not an option. It comes back to
Yeah.
bite us a little bit
Yes.
with, our desire to always have an answer, always be positive, to solve and do the impossible.
Yeah.
so when failure's not an option and you're put into an unwinnable situation, then how does your psyche respond? As a
Yeah.
leader, as a mission manager, when you are faced with the possibility of having a hole in a shuttle that's already in orbit and you have no way to fix that, what are you going to do? You
Yeah.
know, it's very possible that your psyche will choose not to look at it because it's easier
Mm,
to ignore the problem than to have
yeah.
to face that there's an unwinnable situation that you're in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so you discovered these things, but any one of those, much less all of them, when you said it's identity, our own credibility, it's the fear of cancellation, it's the data that I don't really have, it's the problem solving, it's the do the impossible and positivity. So, how in the world do you overcome those behaviors in a culture where everyone, again, the culture is positive in so many ways, but how did you approach that in terms of like how does that get solved?
You know, so much of it is just awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of the work that I do is about awareness, self-awareness, and
Yeah.
just awareness in general. And
Yeah.
a lot of things become self-correcting once you're aware of them.
Yeah.
And so, I taught leaders that when they heard the phrase "save the program" in a meeting, that they needed to call a timeout and have a conversation about what that meant and the cognitive
Mm,
bias that was being introduced in the moment. Like, that's
yeah.
not what we're doing here. We can't make a decision from that standpoint.
Yeah.
We started normalizing dissenting opinions and making decisions, with always with at least one dissenting opinion, so that it wasn't like an oh my gosh moment if somebody
Yeah.
dissented or spoke against something, so that it felt more normal and more useful
Yeah, of course.
used to it. You know, we we just started trying to figure out where are these things happening? How do we introduce either processes or systems that make it easier for people to do these things? We changed the physical structure of the organization to where people felt like they had, safe, independent pathways of communication,
Mm,
directly up to through safety and engineering organizations that went all the way up to the administrator, that bypassed the program manager,
mm,
because we put honestly, too much into one position, and it was too much for one human being to balance,
yeah,
the
of course.
technical, the schedule, the safety, the
Yeah.
budget, all of that in one position. And subconsciously, engineers at lower levels didn't feel like they necessarily had an advocate all the way up. If they
Yeah,
had a
of
concern,
course.
they felt like at some point it all merged together, which it did.
Yeah.
And so we fixed that.
Yeah. Wow. Those are a lot of different actions with regard to disciplines and processes and practices. And when you think about that, and as you were tasked to bring that into HR and organizational development, um, how long did it take? And I know it's not like a check, we're done. But what did that journey look like in terms of time frame? I'm just curious because it sounds like it's a really significant cultural change. And when did you feel that shifting, or when do you think people noticed that shift?
It shifted pretty quickly
Okay.
at Kennedy Space Center. And, the reason was because of the accident itself.
Yeah.
It was a very significant emotional event that was widely shared by the entire workforce.
Yeah.
And because of that, the culture was very malleable in the aftermath.
Okay.
People were very willing to listen. People were very willing to get on board and change and shift.
Yeah.
Everybody was looking for, what do we shift? What do we change?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I wasn't, you know, I wasn't the super genius on high that was coming up with all of these ideas and what needs to be done. Like, we were collecting input from the entire workforce.
Yeah.
I believe it was over 2,500, suggestions from
Oh,
people
wow.
on things that we
Yeah.
could do to improve, that I culled through and was trying to look at what are the themes, what are the areas that we can try to solve this. Where are people feeling like they don't have as much freedom to speak up, or they're seeing
Yeah.
challenges or issues? And so everybody was involved. Everybody felt like they had a piece of it. You know, e- Everybody felt personally responsible for it.
Yeah.
I I do a talk frequently about it and tell the story, and I honestly, like, I tear up
Yeah.
most of the time when I give the talk, and
Yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't directly working that mission, but I feel so accountable for it
Yeah.
that I'm starting to tear up now. Like when I think
Yeah.
about it, I feel so emotionally connected to it.
Yeah.
The whole workforce, I believe, did at the same time. Like it was a
Yeah.
significant emotional event, and those are rare. Most companies that I work with, I don't think any company I've worked with has had a similar event.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it usually takes longer because
Yeah.
people aren't as
Yes.
ready to jump on and like, I will do
Yeah.
anything. So it
Right.
took us about a year to get to the point to where Congress was satisfied with what we had done.
Oh, wow.
I'd say it was probably 2 or 3 years before we got to where I was satisfied with what we had done.
Yeah.
And part of that was after I'd gone and created the organization development group, and we were embedding ourselves down into each organization so that, with
Oops. Oh, darn it. It froze up. Oops, you
yeah, it
froze up there
did.
a minute. Okay, you said we were embedded and then you got embedded in the video. So you said
Okay, all
you
right.
got embedded into the different organizations that helped you to feel like you were making progress, correct?
Yeah, we got embedded
Yeah.
into the
Yeah.
organization, so we were able to do specifically what each organization needed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and it's, isn't there, it's kind of ironic in a way that you say, we're wired to survive, right? The survival of ourselves individually and collectively is what creates a lot of the choices we make that we're not even aware of. And when someone else not surviving, as an emotional, as you said, in an emotional moment, creates that level of vulnerability to people to look at themselves and look at the culture and say, we can't do it that way anymore. That amount of, emotional, psychological readiness um, seems just huge, right? And as you said, for organizations that don't have that significant moment where everyone can be that vulnerable and everybody can be that open and honest and not thinking about all those other things, how do you how do you help organizations to realize that, right, culturally? Because essentially the work that you're doing now is helping organizations strengthen their culture, their operating systems. And so what how do you get that point across to them so it is equally compelling and they can be equally honest and vulnerable?
So I think there's two parts to this question. I think helping people to be honest and vulnerable is about creating an environment where that is okay, where it's safe to
Yeah.
do so, where they feel like it's worth it to do so. If
Yeah.
they don't feel like it's safe, it's very hard to do it. And if they don't feel like it's worth it, then why bother?
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
you want to have both of those in place. And then a piece of it is helping people learn how to do that, what that
Yeah.
looks like. I've heard a variety of different terms used for it. One I heard recently that I liked was called strategic openness or strategic authenticity.
Mm.
You know, and I'm not even sure if I like that one completely because it can
Yeah.
be misinterpreted. When I say it, I don't mean to, like, you're not being open to manipulate. You're being open to be honest, but you're being open in a way that is honest and helpful, useful.
Yeah.
Because when we teach this, we will spend several hours teaching openness and what is openness and how do you be open and what does it really look like and what's the difference between, you know being open and not useful
Yeah.
and helpful? Like,
Yes.
does it mean that I just share way too much about myself? Does,
Right.
no, that's not helpful. Does it mean I say,
Yes.
does
Stop
it,
doing
do I
that.
have to tell people like these embarrassing things about me? No, it doesn't mean that, you know,
Right.
but it means that you're contributing things to your coworkers that help them understand you better in ways that allows you to work better together.
Sure.
And even within that, there are ways to be, more effective and less effective. And one of the
Yeah.
stories I tell is that when I was working at NASA, there were these contractors, and I was overseeing their contract, and I was having a meeting with the senior managers of that contractor, and I was getting ready to walk into the room, and so as the NASA person, their eyes were going to be on me,
Yeah.
and to some extent, it was important what I would say or how I would react. And just before I walked into that room, I got a phone call from my wife, and she was pregnant. And she said, I've just been in an accident,
Oh.
a car accident. She said, I'm okay, but I've got to get the car towed. Everything's okay. But it was just that immediate, like, I've been in an accident, like
Yes.
it just caused me to have like that
Of
emotional like
course.
spike, like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
And so, but she was
Oh,
okay. So I walked in there, but I knew that like emotionally I was like a little bit charged. So I had a
yes.
choice in that moment, right?
Yeah.
I can withhold that and I can gut through. I didn't have to tell them anything,
Right.
right? Or I
Yeah.
can be open and say, "Hey, I just got a call."
Yeah.
And now this is where I have the choice about how open to be,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I had a good relationship with all the contractors that I worked with. So I was completely open. I was like, "Hey, I just got a call from my wife. She's in an accident. She's okay." But
Yeah.
if you notice me like not being my normal self,
Yes.
like that's what's
Yes,
going
of
on, everything's
course.
fine, because I knew that there was going to be, stuff, we call it leaking. There's going to be stuff leaking out, and
Yes, of
they're looking at me
course.
for body language and facial expressions and stuff as they're presenting, and they could have easily walked out of there if I'd have said nothing and thinking, "Oh my gosh, he's upset," or there's a
Yes, of
problem with
course.
what we're doing, and it was just an opportunity to demonstrate openness in a way that's useful. I didn't
Yeah.
have to, and it was a
Yeah.
personal thing, but it made the interaction more effective.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
so learning how to do it and how to do it effective is a very, very important part of it. And
Yeah.
so you want to do that, and you want to be authentic. And I think that it really helps make workplaces more effective, and it's a key part of how you get things done.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a great example of a story and thinking about the emotional regulation of something important to you or relationships that's important to you and how to acknowledge the effect of that. Because as you said, the unintended consequence could have been people are noting your body language because of course you're still processing all that and your body's processing on all that and how that could be misinterpreted or misconstrued. And I think that level of you talked earlier about self-awareness, I think is so significant. And I don't know that people think about that, right? In that
Yeah.
way, that you're thinking, I need to re-regulate myself in a way, and I need, in order to do that, it's healthy to talk about it so other people don't um, misconstrue body language, facial expressions, all of
Yeah.
those things. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I,
it's
I think about people that are going through rough times at home, whether
yeah,
they're caring for an aging parent, or they're going through a
yes,
divorce, or a variety of
yeah,
things. And I mean, you don't have to disclose details.
right, right,
It can be as
right,
simple as, "Hey, I'm going through something at home right now,"
yeah,
but
yeah,
sharing, "This is happening for me outside of work," or "This is what I'm going through," so that people know that it's, because the crazy thing is the way that we're wired, the second I see something in the absence of a story, I make up
yes,
one.
of course
And the
I
story
do.
I'm always going to make up is going to be about me, because of
Right.
course I am the center point of my own
Of
story,
course.
right? I am the focal point of my own story. So everything is
Yes.
about me
Of
all
course
the
it
time.
is. Yes.
So if you have a funny look on your face, that funny look has to be about me.
Of course it does. Of course it does. And it means
Yeah.
something bad for me too, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
'cause
Because
I'm,
that, again, that keeps me safe. It keeps me
yes,
alive.
yes,
It's
right. I
better
have
for
to
me to
interpret those
assume,
threats.
yeah, it's better for me to assume that it means something bad than it means
Yes,
something good. Because if I'm
yes,
wrong about it being bad, then I still keep myself safe. If I'm wrong
yes,
about it being good, then I die.
yes. So there we have it. It's, but I think what's so interesting about this to me too. I mean, most of the people listening aren't they're not launching spacecraft. They're not doing brain surgery. We're working in organizations and companies and all that good stuff. So there is so much change. There is so much growth. There is so much uncertainty, and if for the people listening, what would be some of the subtle signs that if people start thinking about the culture around them, that may be unintentionally encouraging the kind of silence that you're talking about? Because you're saying be more open, be more strategically open. So what do you think are some of those signs of silence or risk avoidance that people could be more aware of in their own culture or in their own behaviors too?
Yeah. I mean, so if we're talking about for leaders, I think it's pausing and noticing, are people speaking up? Are they talking
Hmm.
back?
Yeah.
And then also noticing, what am I doing when they do?
Yeah.
Am I acting on it? Am I thanking them for it? Am I encouraging it?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
am I, you know, it can be hard. It can be challenging to be a leader.
Yeah.
Um, and some of the reasons it can be challenging is because one of the things that I can want to do is I can want to answer your question really fast.
Yeah.
And so when you're telling me something, I can feel like, oh, I'm helping you out,
Yeah.
and we we call it levels of openness. And
Mhm.
some of the lower levels of openness is, the lowest level is, no, you're wrong.
Right.
Well, this is actually levels of listening, right? So
Yeah.
levels of
Yeah.
listening go along with levels of openness, but the lower level of listening is, no, you're wrong. And then I get up a little bit higher and I'm like, okay, so, let me tell you how it is. And
Yeah.
so it's like I can put those two together and say, oh, no, no, you're wrong. Let me tell you how it is. And I can mean that from the very best place possible.
Of
Like,
course.
it's benevolent. I want to help you out. Oh, you have this
Yes.
wrong misunderstanding. I can accidentally be shutting you down though, because you haven't
Yeah.
finished like getting to tell me what you feel or what's on your mind.
Yeah.
And so, as a leader, a lot of times I want to just jump to that point. It feels efficient. Like I know where you're going with this. Like, let me give you
Where's
the
the
right
flow?
answer.
Right.
You know?
I do a session on the dopamine of being right, and how good that feels for leaders,
It
right? Of course,
does.
we want to be right. Of course, we have all this experience. We're supposed to be credible. We have a certain, our own identity and brand wrapped up in it. And then, but yeah, how does that unintentionally shut people down? And I think there's also a difference between me um, being open in a constructive, helpful way and me being open in a nasty, argumentative way. When you think about
Yeah.
openness, so I can de- basically destructively challenge you, or I can constructively challenge you. And I think that's a lot. I think leaders sometimes associate like, well, they didn't say that very nicely to me, or they're being destructive. But how do you help someone be constructive in their disagreement too, so they can do that in a healthy, helpful way? But I think a lot of the destructive comments come from frustration of not being heard.
Yeah.
So that whole dynamic, I think, is super important. Okay, so you said kind of thinking about, you said speaking up. What do people speak up? And then what do I do when people speak up? Anything else that you see that leaders are inadvertently contributing to that silence? Those are big ones.
Um, Let me think about that. Contributing to the silence. I mean, there's some there's some very simple and obvious things like not asking for feedback
Yeah.
in the
Yes.
first place.
Yeah.
There's the what do you do with it in the moment that I spoke to, but then there's
Yeah.
also what do you do with it in general? Because as I said before, it's a combination of, is it safe and is it worth it? And
Yeah.
so, is it worth it? A piece of that is anybody going to do anything about it? And
Yeah.
so, if as a leader, I never do anything with any of the feedback that I
Yeah.
get from people, then at some point it's going to stop feeling worth it. So even if
Yeah.
I am a great listener and in the moment I'm very gracious, but I never do anything about anything that anybody tells me,
Yeah.
they're going to stop telling me stuff as well because,
Yeah.
it's going to stop feeling worth it.
Right. Like, what's the effect? Was it
Yeah,
even valuable and worth my
right.
time and energy? Yeah. So you talk when you and I talked, you talked about the connection of, behavior and culture and strategy, and you reference kind of the human operating system. And when you go into organizations, when you work with leaders, how do you help them understand what that means?
When you think about your strategy is boiled down to the simplest level is how are we going to be successful?
Yeah.
It's which is and a how is what are we going to do? And doing is really the behaviors of your people. What are your people going to do? Those are behaviors. And so
Yeah.
when we're talking about culture, culture is the common shared behaviors and beliefs of the people in your organization. And so that's the reason that culture is so critically important for strategy. It's the reason that Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
If your behaviors are the things that you need to do for your strategy, then it's naturally going to drive your strategy. If that's what your culture is, then it's driving your strategy. If your culture is something that is not, even if it doesn't directly oppose it, but if it's not aligned with what you need to happen for your strategy, then that means that you're going to have to put energy into the system to get people to do those behaviors that are required for your strategy.
Yeah.
Any additional energy you have to introduce into the system is costs you something.
Yeah.
And it's going to take more work, more effort, more energy. And most organizations don't have extra energy, extra to spend. It's going to take whatever you've got just to execute that strategy in the first place. And
Sure.
so you want your culture to be as directly aligned with your strategy as possible so that the way that people naturally behave, because that's just the way that things are done around here, it aligns with that strategy so that people are doing the things and behaving in the ways that you want them to behave because that's what we need to do for our strategy. And
Yeah.
so when we think about that and we get really clear about what is our strategy? What are those behaviors? What are truly the critical behaviors for our strategy? And that's really where some of the art comes in, is trying to boil it down to those critical behaviors. Not
Yeah.
just everything, but what's truly those few
Yes.
critical behaviors that are the key differentiators for making the strategy either succeed or not. If these are
Yeah.
absent, then that's where we're going to fall down. And then we work backwards from those and say, okay, so what do we want people to believe? Because we behave based on our beliefs. So what are
Yes.
the beliefs that drive those behaviors? And then it goes back to similar to what we were talking about with the Columbia accident. What are the experiences that produce those beliefs? Because that's where we get to operate.
Yeah.
Because it would be great if we could just tell people what to believe,
Yeah.
but it doesn't
That'd
work.
be great. Darn
Yeah.
it.
So we
Horrible.
get to design experiences that
Yeah.
drive that create those beliefs. And, you know, this is again where we go back to thinking about, okay, so there's different types of experiences, you know, and there's two dimensions that you can measure them on that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
How widely shared is it?
Mm.
And how big of an impact does it have?
Yeah.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
it's great if you can have experiences that have a large impact and are widely shared. Usually those are expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
so you'll have a few of them, but you can't do them every day and you can't do a lot of
Right.
them. but we can have some of them. Let's figure out strategically, where do we plan those in, you
Okay.
know. Sometimes you can have them that are widely shared but low impact. They're easy to do. Let's put the core values
Yeah.
on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody walks by them. It's widely shared. Impact, eh,
Right.
you know. But it doesn't hurt to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some things have a high impact, but they're not widely shared. When I give you one-on-one feedback, that has a high impact on you personally.
Sure.
Doesn't necessarily isn't broadly shared. Now, it becomes broadly shared when I teach all of the managers in the organization how to do that, and it becomes
Yeah.
something that we're all doing as an organization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I love that description. I love the description. So we're defining the culture through the key behaviors. The key behaviors are connected to the fundamental beliefs. The beliefs are created through the shared experiences, and then you look at the impact and the sharedness of that. I think that's really cool. What a fun job,
it is.
to be
It
able to
is.
do this. It's like, oh my gosh. So, let's say I'm a leader listening today, and I'm in my own organization. I'm like, this sounds so cool, and you've experienced it as at such a phenomenal level, but you look at me like, okay, what can I possibly do differently starting today to strengthen my own human operating system within my organization? What would you advise?
I hope it doesn't sound too cliche, but the reality is start with yourself. Like,
Yeah.
it all starts from within. It all starts with the
Mhm.
self, and it all starts with you as the leader. And so raising your own self-awareness, focusing on how am I showing up? What
Yeah.
do I see? What am I not noticing? How am I contributing to the way that this organization feels and the way that people feel about themselves in this organization and the culture and the environment here? You know, as the leader, you have a hugely disproportionate impact on the culture.
Yeah.
CEO, you get to drive that. And so just noticing that for yourself, and the more that you can increase your own self-awareness and your awareness of the things that you're doing and driving through the organization, the better. And that's
Yeah.
really where it all starts. And
Yeah.
like I said, once you start noticing, then a lot of it becomes self-correcting.
Yeah. Yeah. Or living with the cognitive dissonance that you're doing things that aren't that aren't
Yeah.
really working very well. Having to admit that, which is also very difficult for people. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's kind of sad that I have to say this, but there are some CEOs that don't realize that they are a part of the system. They,
yeah.
you know, you're
Yeah.
as a CEO, you're not here and the system is here. Like you are the system. You're in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And so when we say, oh, we want to fix the system or we want to work on the system, you can't work on the system without working on yourself. It's
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah. And I fundamentally believe that strongly at my core. I share it. There was research done, um, and now I'm can't think of if it was Gartner group, but it was the fact that self-awareness is a more important predictor of leadership success than intelligence or previous experience. And I fundamentally believe that as well. I think the people that I've worked with over time, that I've done a lot of leadership coaching with, the people that are disconnected from themselves, understanding their reactions, their triggers, the impact they're having, are not as successful, right? Most people don't come to me for leadership coaching because they don't have good business acumen or technical knowledge. They already have that. But how are they
Right.
using it? And what is the
Yeah.
experience that other people have with them? Yeah, I think that's
Yep.
really important.
Yeah.
Gosh,
Absolutely.
I think I could spend I think I could travel around with you and just absorb your wisdom and knowledge and be a better human being, which I would love.
Yeah.
But
Sounds like fun.
doesn't it? I'm sure you need another assistant. I'd be a good one. So I want to circle back to one more thing that you said as we wrap up here, because a lot of organizations are thinking about employee engagement. And you said, employee engagement at NASA is very high. People loved working there, wanted to work there, aspired to work there. And if you kind of think about that level of employee engagement and a really healthy culture, how would someone assess, again, kind of looking inside their organization, um, how would I look at the difference between those two things
But between employee engagement and what?
and a healthy culture?
Okay.
Because most people assume engagement, our culture is good, but you're
Yeah.
suggesting that
Yeah.
no, we are all part of the culture and those beliefs and behaviors are the
Yeah.
disconnect. But so I just wanted to get
Yeah.
that straight
Yeah.
in my head and
Yeah.
others.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, I love the term you're using, healthy. I appreciate you not using good.
Yeah.
I typically use the word effective in
Okay.
describing it, and I like to use that term because it's it varies by organization. Because what is effective for your organization is not necessarily what's effective for another person's organization.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I think there's three pillars that define effectiveness for a culture within an organization. And the first one is employee engagement. If
Okay.
your culture should be driving employee engagement within your organization. And, you probably know as well or better than I do what the studies out there say about employee engagement and what the
Yeah.
returns are from that. So you
Yeah.
absolutely want to get that.
Yes, for
The
sure.
second one that I personally believe very strongly in is that your organizational culture should contribute to making your people's lives better.
Mm.
And I think that that's people inside your organization and outside your organization.
Yeah.
And again, I can point you to study after study that talks about how people's health and longevity and lots of other
Mhm.
things are impacted by their work life and how they feel at work. I can point you to studies about how, organizations have the ability to improve people's lives inside their organization, outside the organization. I think that effective organizations are doing positive things for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is is it really truly driving your strategy? Is it contributing
Yeah.
to market success for you?
Yeah.
And so it's those, I like the power of three, it's those three
Yes.
legs of a stool.
Yep.
I think if you kind of give that litmus test and you imagine and you can think of probably companies that have any two of the three, but not the third one, I would argue that that's not a company I would want to be or
Yeah.
work for. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. And I think it's a great way to, the employee engagement, I'm connected to the purpose, and our purpose is meaningful and significant. We're making a positive contribution to the universe and
yeah.
we're getting results from it. I mean, those three things collectively, I mean, it makes intuitive sense, but I think people don't always think of it that way, right? Like they don't think
Yeah.
of like, what is that culture piece to it? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliantly done. All right. I love this. I have just again, I can't say enough about how much I appreciate the time that you've spent with me, both, before this podcast interview, just sharing your story, sharing the things that you've gone through and your career as it has, as you've navigated through it so far has been amazing. And I'm sure the work that you're doing with organizations beyond NASA today are just phenomenal. So you're an inspiration to me
Well, it's
for
been a
sure.
pleasure. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, I can, and I mentioned to you, my brother and sister, both engineers, and I can hardly wait to tell them, like, ooh, I got to meet
Yeah.
Philip Mead, and
Well,
he
I
was
hope
in
they enjoy the
HR,
episode.
right? And listen to this episode, and he did organizational development, and like, super cool. So you're inspiring me, but I know you're going to inspire my audience and my family as well. So thank you for all of that, Philip. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you.
Before we wrap up for today, I'd like to leave you with one question to reflect on. What behaviors might you or your culture be unintentionally rewarding or discouraging? As Philip reminded us, culture isn't about what we say we value, it's the behaviors, our systems, our structures, and also how our leaders consistently reinforce behaviors and beliefs. And if people don't feel safe raising those concerns or challenging assumptions or sharing difficult truths, even the most wonderful teams can drift towards poor decisions. If this conversation resonated with you, I would encourage you to share it with another leader or maybe some of your team. And some of the best leadership conversation, remember, they begin with, what are we missing here? So thank you to Philip for sharing not only his remarkable career with NASA, but the lessons that every leader needs to know to build a better, healthier, more effective team and organization. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. It helps us to reach more leaders who are committed to leading with greater intention and purpose. Until next time, remember, leadership isn't accidental, it's intentional.